Good afternoon. My name is Allie Iberly, and I want to thank you for attending the Amendment 55 for Scamp and Yellowmouth Grouper scoping sessions. Without further ado, let's jump in. Before I get into the details of Amendment 55, I want to go over some housekeeping for this hearing. So the purpose of these hearings is to gather your input to help the council make decisions on this proposed amendment. Public comment is crucial, and it will help shape the council's final decisions on amendments. So first, I will review all the details for Amendment 55, and then I'll pause to answer any clarifying questions so that you can best make your comment. And then finally, and most importantly, we'll pause and a council member is available to take your comment. A little bit about the council if you're new to the process. The South Atlantic Fishery Management Council is one of 8 regional fishery management councils, and they work with NOAA to establish fisheries management in the EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone, which ranges from 3 to 200 miles offshore. The South Atlantic Fishery Management Council's specific region is from North Carolina down through the Florida Keys, so it's that region in red on the map. The council is made up of recreational and commercial fishermen, state marine agency reps, and federal partners. We have 17 members, 13 voting and 4 non-voting, and the members make up representatives from each state in that region. So the council provides recommendations to NOAA for fisheries management. We use a lot of acronyms in fisheries management, so I wanted to go over a couple that you're going to hear me use throughout the rest of this presentation. The first is OFL, or overfishing limit. This is the number of fish above which fishing activities would be removing fish from the population faster than they would be replaced. This level is set by the SSC, or the Scientific and Statistical Committee, and it's based off of the most recent assessment. The next is the ABC, or acceptable biological catch. This is the highest number of fish that can be harvested. It is recommended by the SSC and can include a buffer between the OFL and this level. And that buffer is based on scientific uncertainty. So the more scientific uncertainty you have, the greater the buffer between the OFL and the ABC. The next is the ACL, or annual catch limit. This is the limit for how many fish can be landed in a year, a fishing year. This is set by the council, and it can be less than or equal to the ABC, depending on management uncertainty. So if the council feels that there's a lot of management uncertainty, they can set a wider buffer between the ACL and the ABC. The next is optimum yield. This is kind of that optimal amount of harvest for a stock, but in the South Atlantic, this is typically set equal to the ACL. And then finally, we have AMs, or accountability measures. These help prevent the ACL from being exceeded and reacts to the ACL being exceeded if it does happen. AMs can kind of be thought of in 2 different chunks: an in-season AM, which happens in the current fishing season, and then a post-season AM, which reacts to any overages in the current fishing season in the next one. Now that we've reviewed the background information, I want to go over the tentative timing for Amendment 55. This amendment's pretty early on in the amendment process. The council reviewed the results of the assessment in March of 2023. Most recently, at their June amendment, they reviewed an initial suite of actions and alternatives and then approved the amendment for scoping. So this scoping session is the first time that the council is soliciting public comment. In September, the council will review the comments gathered from these meetings, and then in December, they'll review a preliminary analysis, and that's when the second public hearings will be held in tentatively the winter of 2024. And then the amendment is scheduled to be approved for formal review in September of 2024. So why is the council starting work on Amendment 55? I mentioned the assessment in the previous slide when I talked about the timeline. And so Amendment 55 is in response to CDAR 68, which is the most recent assessment for Scamp and Yellowmouth Grouper. This is the first time these species have been assessed together, so the assessment considers them a single species. And it was done that way because of misidentification between the two species. The assessment indicated that the stock was overfished, but not experiencing overfishing. The other thing that this amendment will do is to update the catch levels to include recreational landings estimates from the FES, or Fishing Effort Survey, updating them from the now outdated Coastal Household Telephone Survey, or CHTS. I mentioned on the previous slide that CDR 68 assessed both scamp and yellowmouth grouper together. That assessment will then provide catch levels for both of these species combined. And because of that, the council will have to do a little bit of complex reorganization. So all the species within that dark blue rectangle are what we would consider the South Atlantic shallow water groupers. And they are all subject to a spawning season closure. However, the species on the right have a complex ACL, so they are all under one catch limit, and they have an accountability measure attached to this kind of group of species. However, the species on the left, so gag grouper, scamp, red grouper, and black grouper, all have individual ACLs and AMs. So those grouper within the orange box are called the other shallow water groupers. So those are the ones that have that complex ACL and AMs. So what the council is going to do through Amendment 55 is essentially remove yellowmouth grouper from that complex and establish a new complex that will consist of scamp and yellowmouth grouper. So for the scamp and yellowmouth grouper complex, what needs to be established? The two bubbles represent status quo. So scamp currently has its own individual ACL. That ACL is inclusive of what we would consider those outdated recreational landings estimates from the Coastal Household Telephone Survey. And then we also have an ACL for the other shallow water grouper complex. So like I mentioned, we're going to be reorganizing that other shallow water grouper complex and establishing the scamp yellowmouth complex. And then from there, since that complex is essentially a blank slate, it's brand new, we're going to be first establishing stock determination criteria. So this just sets parameters for this new complex and sets things like the maximum sustainable yield and maximum fishing mortality threshold. Next, we talked a little bit about that stock determination from that assessment, which indicated that the stock was overfished but not experiencing overfishing. So under Magnuson, we do need to establish a rebuilding plan for this new complex because of that determination. So we've reorganized the complex, established those stock determination criteria, and established a rebuilding plan. So next, an ABC, ACL, and OY will be established for the scamp yellowmouth complex. So this is just setting those catch levels. And then from those catch levels, they'll be divvied up into sector annual catch limits. So this is essentially establishing those allocations between the commercial and recreational sectors. And then we'll establish commercial and recreational accountability measures for this complex. And so that's what we'll get done for the scamp yellowmouth complex. But we still have to think about those other shallow water grouper complexes. So once we remove yellowmouth, there's a little bit of work that needs to get done for this complex. So now we're going to shift gears and think about what the council needs to get done as far as the other shallow water grouper complex goes. And we have those images of those species up top. So again, we have those two status quo bubbles. Right now we have scamp and the other shallow water grouper are separate, and yellowmouth is included in that other shallow water grouper complex. When we reorganized the other shallow water grouper complex, we pulled yellowmouth out and combined it with scamp. So now we're left with the annual catch limit for the other shallow water groupers being modified from the removal of yellowmouth, but it also includes this outdated recreational landings estimates from the CHTS survey. So the council has discussed two different options. The first being considering whether or not these remaining species, so red hind, rock hind, Graysby, coney, and yellowfin grouper require federal management. If they don't, then these species would not have a bag limit, a spawning season closure, any federal management measures. Or updating the ABC and ACL and allocations for this other shallow water grouper complex. So the SSC would need to develop an updated ABC since none of these species are assessed. So it would need to go back to the unassessed species work group, and the council is currently kind of debating some timeline on that. But those are the two options that the council is currently considering as far as what to do with the other shallow water grouper complex.